So I just mentioned to my girlfriend that some people, including Peter Singer, openly say, they draw an ethical line, and they say if human cognition is below this line, human cognitive ability, human intelligence is below this line, then human beings can be killed or eliminated. Why did this come up? Because we're talking about veganism. In case you think we only talk about veganism on the internet, and I was pointing out that there are people who basically feel that some animals should have animal rights. That's very common. It's very common. There are people who feel that monkeys should have animal rights, but not cockroaches. Yeah. There are people who feel dolphins should have animal rights, but not goldfish. There are a lot of people who feel that way. That there's some line where it's like above a certain level of intelligence, animals get special privileges, and below that they don't. Yeah. So you asked me.
Yeah.
I think you just said, how do you feel about that? There was a question.
Yeah, how do you feel about that? Like, there are people that feel that humans below a certain level of intelligence, it's okay to murder them.
So, keeping it all the way real, which is my steez. I have a brother who has never spoken a sentence in any language. Yeah. He is so severely retarded. Mm-hmm. He is so severely mentally incapable. I'm told he can eat. And, obviously other people have to feed him. He's never had a job. I'm sorry, it's not like I haven't, which was a big controversy in my family. That was a huge source of tension between me and my father, was why did you never bring me to visit him? Why did my father himself never visit this brother? And why was this brother's existence kept secret from me until I was in my mid-20s? It was a big moral thing. Because again, I'm really into just doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. If you got this son, I'm sure, based on what I've been told, he may not appreciate you visiting him. I think he's so mentally incapacitated. I think my father, this is part of what my father said. My father said that he didn't like being visited. That may be true, He might not appreciate you coming around and talking to him. He may not understand a word you're saying. But I do think in terms of duty and honor, minimum once a year, you got to go and visit your own son. Twice a year. I admit, okay, you're not going to go every week to talk to somebody who's not even capable of maybe recognizing you or appreciating your being there. I understand, I can understand that. But anyway, so in my own family, one of my own brothers, a guy with a lot of the same DNA as me, has so little mental capacity that, to what I've been told by his sister, who's also my sister, in case you haven't guessed, is that, one of his sisters who actually has spent time with him, he has never spoken a word in any language. He's never spoken a sentence. He can't, he's severely, obviously, there are animals that have speech. There are animals that have sentences and have complex speech and speak ideas. So, this is, if we're actually playing this game, then my own brother, that would be a question.
Yeah. So who were you saying has that opinion? Someone in the animal rights movement. Yeah,
so Peter Singer is the most prominent person. And to my knowledge, unless a natural vegan wants to come out and clear her name, she used to, support Peter Singer's position, which we've recently brought up. And I'm not going to demonize these people. Their position, I disagree with their position, but it's coherent. It makes sense. Just really briefly, but the same thing within Buddhism. Generally, Buddhists feel that the more an animal resembles human beings, the more it has human rights. You know what I mean? So Buddhists treat monkeys and elephants. Elephants are quite intelligent at quite a high level, and very often Buddhists will say they don't give a damn about fish. That fish just don't count. Now, you know what I mean? I'm not going to demonize. They're normal people. You know what I mean? These are most of them are good people. Some of them are terrible people. Whatever. But you know what I mean? People live with that. That's a mainstream ethical belief. I'm not going to demonize that. That's important to say. Even because remember, I've dealt with really extreme politics. Here in China, we're surrounded by people who are members of the Communist Party and who tell their own children that the mass murder of millions of people was okay under the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, and that's normal here in China. And you've got to deal with that face to face. You can live in a country that's full of people who support what the Catholic Church did when the Catholic Church killed millions of people. These are mainstream beliefs. Even if they're wrong, we have to be, or even if I personally think they're wrong. It's not like I can show you some simple factual proof that I'm right, they're wrong. I can just talk through why I see these things the way they do. But so your question, so where do I stand on that issue? Yeah. And I just respond by saying, look, let's raise the stakes. Let's talk about my own brother. Let's put a human face on it, right? Now, why is my brother alive, given that he was more or less abandoned by his own father? Because of the Canadian taxpayer. We have a system in Canada, which is why the streets of Canada are not filled with mentally impaired beggars, which they are in some countries like Laos. In Laos, you get a sense of how many retarded people there are because you see them on the street. Yeah. And in Canada, you don't. In Cambodia, you get a sense of how many physical cripples there are, like people with one leg, because you see them on the street. You know what I mean? In Canada, we have a wealthy enough country to support an army of mentally disabled people. I think the ethical decision you're making is fundamentally very different in Canada than it is in Laos or Cambodia. That is my honest answer. You know what I mean? I don't think every country has the luxury that Canada has. Now, I think in a country like Canada, I think it should be democratic, and I think it should be transparent. I don't think it should be in a black box of issues nobody's allowed to debate. Yeah. But I do think, generally speaking, in a country like Canada, if you have that debate, you're going to make rational, reasonable choices. I mean, to give an example, one of the issues is, so if you have these people who are severely mentally disabled, probably you cannot take care of them close to the home of their own parents. Right. Probably you do have to centralize it. So maybe in every province, you have 1 or 2 centers of special care for severely disabled people. And then when the parents want to visit or the other relatives or friends want to visit, they have to drive a long way because Canada's a really big country. Yeah. Now, the Netherlands doesn't have that problem. Denmark doesn't. No offense, Netherlands is just not that big. But I mean, Canada, you could have people who are separated from their children if they sign them up for this kind of care by long distance. That is a rational budgetary problem where you say, well, we can't have 500 centers to help the disabled. Or maybe you can. Maybe you can have 500, but you can't have 600. Whatever the number is, you've got to make responsible decisions, and that also has to be in a democratic way. I mean, in Canada, I was mentioning to you, we still have controversies about women getting breast augmentation, getting silicone breast implants paid for by taxpayers. Part of democracy is drawing the line, like for psychological reasons, because their psychiatrist fills out a form saying it'll help raise her self-esteem, this kind of thing, and getting it paid for by taxpayers. Now, different people draw the line in different places. But sure, I mean, part of my answer is I'm actually comfortable with dealing with those questions in a democratic way. Democracy is not perfect. There are lots of examples of issues democracies can't deal with and deal with really, really badly. John Stuart Mill, his big concern was about the majority ruthlessly oppressing the minority. And that is a problem when you look at today, we're just looking at Iraq, when you look at countries where the majority of people may be Muslim, the majority of people may be Muslim fundamentalists, what kind of government, what quality of governance are they going to provide for atheists, for Christians, for Jews, for other minorities? I mean, in Iraq there was the case of the Yazidis, another hard to define religious and ethnic minority within Iraq. There are problems with the majority bullying the minority. But it's an interesting counterpoint to note that a lot of the time you have a totally helpless minority of people, like mentally disabled people. They have no ability to form a union or have lawyers, bargaining on their behalf or something. They have no ability to, lobby government or play the games other vocal minorities might do. But again, really give credit. Democracy is good at some things, bad at others. The sewage treatment. Democracy does not handle sewage treatment very well, You can make an argument that maybe dictatorships are better at dealing with sewage treatment. It is funny the way those things go. But, I think that's actually a very positive thing. And Canada and other wealthy Western countries are a positive example of that. Do I think, though, I've lived in Laos, I've lived in Cambodia. I've been involved, in my small way in humanitarian work and politics and everything there. And those are very different, hard decisions you have to make. I remember I saw one documentary about dealing with mentally disabled and insane people quite likely who had schizophrenia in some poverty-stricken areas of Africa. I remember a documentary that looked at it, and then you get into very different, very hard questions.
Yeah.
Answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's just a case-by-case basis, like right. what exactly the disability level is, and
right.
But yeah, I mean, it is good that in civilized societies like in Canada, you can pay for the treatment of these people for their whole lives, but
and that's what we do.
It is a huge drain on. To me,
sure.
It seems like a drain on just society. And
yep. And somebody has to draw the line about it too. Somebody has to decide how are you actually going to deliver those services. But I just mentioned my approach here again is not a rights-based approach. My approach, I think a critic of mine would say it's just deontological. The question is, what can we do for them? Mm-hmm. How are we going to decide to do what we're going to do for them? And, how do we, but it's just about an ethic of care And the most fundamental idea here is doing the best you can.
Yeah.
And recognizing that in a third world, poverty-stricken, post-war country like Laos, the answer of doing the best you can may be totally different. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you, there was a heart-rending account of a young girl who was sold into sex slavery in Laos and came back with her mind completely broken. And the conditions that were described that she was living in, if she was returned to her family had a wooden attic. Probably the whole house was wood. I can imagine, having lived in Laos, the type of house this was. So in the upper story, they chained her to the wooden post that supported the wall. And what this article described was, all day, with no particular sleeping schedule, she would alternate between lying on the floor, sleeping, passed out, curled up in the fetal position, screaming and shaking, constantly screaming and shaking, and running in a straight line, obviously pulling on her chain, but running as if trying to escape. That was how she responded to the experience of being sold into sex slavery and obviously raped repeatedly and what have you. And the other thing that's eerie about this, if you've ever done research on this area, you can interview not dozens but hundreds of young women who went into prostitution at the same age, under the same conditions, and who even worked with the same pimps, because the same pimps work with hundreds at the same brothel, you know what I mean? And didn't respond to the experience in that way at all. But this young woman totally mentally collapsed. And the question was, what can we, as Laotian society, as a poverty society, what can we do for this young woman? Keeping her chained to a wall, chained to a post, is not a great solution. Putting her into a hospital in Laos, maybe worse. If you go to the hospital, you know what I mean? Like, it's not, you know what I mean? What can we do with cases of extreme mental disability or extreme trauma or extreme insanity, mental incapacity, what have you? Those are really hard questions. And I don't think the Communist Party of Laos has the answers, but it's part of the role of democracy. Again, I don't see this in a human rights perspective. I see it in, so you have the demos come together and try to make sober decisions of, what is the best we can do? How are we going to do this? And, in Canada, we do have some very generous programs. You can see programs about disabled people playing ice hockey, getting disabled people out and putting them on the ice. And, they can't wear skates because they'll get, that's too dangerous. But, where you give them special shoes and they can shuffle around on the ice, and you have a whole bunch of people. There are some very generous things we can do. But, between that and, actually having someone chained to a wall, metal and wood. And, obviously this whole conversation happens in the shadow of Adolf Hitler. And the reality is the eugenic policies that Adolf Hitler engaged in of, actually exterminating mentally disabled people. There's a very interesting history how that came about, how those decisions were made. I think that was the sobering moment for Western civilization to look and say, okay, either we're going down this eugenics path or what? What does it mean to take responsibility for the fact that in any given society, a certain percentage of people are never going to be able to contribute. They're never going to be able to hold a job and pay taxes. And we got to look at our amassed wealth as taxpayers and just ask ourselves, what can we do for them, expecting nothing in return? And again, to keep it all the way real, there's also a sense in which that's not altruism, because there's a sense in which we don't want to see those people on the street. We don't want to see them begging on the street corners. And that is indeed partly for our sake. And
we don't just want to
not for their sake,
them when they're born.
Well, some do. Some do. I think Peter Singer and so on. That's a real question. Some do. Peter Singer is pro-murder. He says if you don't reach a certain cognitive level, I'm certain with my brother, he would support murdering my brother. Yeah. Keeping it all the way real. About the ciel.